What begins to change inside us at that moment is not just the mind, but the chemistry of the entire body, because every thought we repeat and every emotion we sustain becomes a biological instruction that the nervous system learns to recognize as reality. For years, we were taught that DNA is fixed, that our genetic expression is sealed at birth like a permanent blueprint. But modern discoveries in epigenetics reveal something very different. The environment surrounding our cells influences genetic activity constantly, and one of the most powerful environments affecting the body is the emotional atmosphere we create within ourselves every single day. Stress changes the body, fear changes the body, hope changes the body, meaning changes the body. The signals produced by our emotions influence hormones, immune responses, neural pathways, and even the activation of certain genetic processes. When I speak about DNA activation, I am not referring to fantasy or supernatural mutation. I am describing the awakening of dormant human potential already woven into our biology. Most people live inside repetitive emotional loops. The body memorizes anxiety, it memorizes limitation. It memorizes emotional survival patterns until those states feel normal. Over time, we stop responding consciously to life and begin reacting automatically from subconscious conditioning. And this is where the deeper transformation begins. The moment we interrupt those unconscious patterns, the body starts receiving new instructions. When elevated emotions such as gratitude, compassion, courage, or genuine appreciation become sustained experiences rather than temporary reactions, the nervous system reorganizes itself. Brain activity changes, hormonal balance shifts. Even perception itself begins to expand because we are no longer filtering reality only through survival. I often ask people to consider a simple question. What if many of the abilities we admire in extraordinary individuals are not rare gifts but natural human capacities waiting for the correct internal conditions to emerge? Throughout history, there have always been people capable of remarkable intuition, accelerated healing, heightened creativity, deep empathy, or profound resilience under impossible circumstances. Perhaps these abilities are not anomalies. Perhaps they are glimpses of what becomes available when human consciousness operates in coherence rather than internal conflict. The heart plays a much larger role in this process than many realize. Scientific research increasingly shows that the heart generates an electromagnetic field influencing the brain and the rest of the body. When emotional states become coherent, the communication between heart and brain becomes more synchronized. In practical terms, this means we think more clearly, react less impulsively, and access deeper levels of awareness. Most people underestimate how exhausting internal contradiction can be. We may speak positively while secretly expecting failure. We may desire change while emotionally remaining attached to old pain. The body receives mixed signals, and confusion becomes our baseline state. DNA activation, in a grounded sense, begins when thought, emotion, intention, and action align into a coherent message. Ancient traditions understood this in symbolic language long before modern laboratories could measure biological responses. They taught that human beings possess untapped inner energy, hidden intelligence, and expanded states of awareness accessible through disciplined attention. Today, neuroscience and psychophysiology are beginning to describe similar principles through measurable data, different languages perhaps, but pointing toward the same essential truth. Human beings are far more adaptable and powerful than we once believed. One of the greatest misunderstandings about transformation is the belief that change happens instantly. In reality, the body changes through repetition. Every time we consciously choose a new emotional response instead of an automatic survival reaction, we strengthen new neural circuits. Every time we remain calm in situations that once triggered fear, we teach the body a new identity. Gradually, the old emotional programs weaken from disuse. This process is not always comfortable. The body becomes addicted to familiar chemistry, even when that chemistry is harmful. Stress hormones can become so normalized that peace initially feels unfamiliar. Many people abandon transformation because discomfort appears during the transition. But discomfort is often evidence that old biological conditioning is dissolving. I have seen individuals completely reshape their lives after changing the emotional patterns they carried for decades. Their health improved, their relationships transformed, their creativity expanded. Not because they became different people overnight, but because they stopped reinforcing the internal signals that kept their bodies trapped in survival mode. And perhaps this is the real meaning behind unlocking hidden human superpowers. It is not about escaping humanity. It is about fully embodying the deeper capacities already present within us. Greater intuition may emerge when mental noise quiets. Increased resilience may appear when fear no longer dominates the nervous system. Clearer perception may arise when the brain and heart begin operating in harmony instead of conflict. The fascinating part is that the body is always listening. Every emotion becomes chemistry. Every repeated thought becomes electrical activity. Every belief becomes a biological instruction, shaping the way we experience reality itself. And once we truly understand that relationship between consciousness and biology, we begin to realize that the human system has been waiting for us to remember something essential about our own nature, something hidden beneath years of conditioning and emotional noise, something that starts to reveal itself the moment we stop living as passive observers of life and begin participating consciously in the signals we send into every cell of the body. In those moments of inner alignment, people often describe a strange sense of clarity, as if intuition becomes louder than fear. They notice synchronicities. They recover energy they thought was permanently lost. Their attention sharpens. Their emotional reactions slow down enough for awareness to intervene before old habits take control. And the deeper we explore this relationship between consciousness, emotion, and biology, the more we begin to suspect that human potential has never truly been absent. It has simply remained buried beneath distraction, chronic stress, emotional fragmentation, and the constant conditioning that taught us to doubt the extraordinary intelligence already operating within us long before we ever learned how to consciously access it. Once that hidden intelligence begins to awaken, we start noticing that the body responds to intention in ways most people never stop long enough to observe. Small changes appear first. Sleep becomes deeper. Mental clarity increases. Emotional reactions lose their intensity. The nervous system no longer feels trapped in constant defense. And from the outside, these shifts may seem ordinary, but internally they represent something profound. The body is beginning to trust a new emotional reality. Most people spend their lives preparing for danger rather than preparing for possibility. The brain becomes conditioned to scan for threats, rejection, disappointment, or failure. Over time, this survival-oriented perception narrows awareness. We stop seeing opportunities because the nervous system prioritizes protection over expansion. In many ways, the modern human being is biologically exhausted, not because life itself is impossible, but because the body was never designed to remain in prolonged states of emotional stress without recovery. When stress becomes chronic, the body diverts energy away from long-term repair and growth. Immune balance weakens, cognitive performance declines, emotional resilience shrinks. But when we intentionally cultivate elevated emotional states, the body begins reallocating energy differently. Healing processes improve, creativity increases, focus sharpens. We become more adaptive instead of reactive. This is why emotional mastery is not simply psychological, it is biological. Every emotional state carries a chemical signature. Anger creates one pattern, fear creates another, gratitude creates another entirely. Compassion, purpose, inspiration, and genuine connection all influence the body differently. The longer we sustain a state, the more familiar that chemistry becomes to the nervous system. Eventually, the body memorizes the emotions so deeply that it starts influencing our identity. Many people unknowingly define themselves through emotional history. They say, "This is just who I am," when in reality, they are describing patterns the body learned through repetition. A person who lived in disappointment may unconsciously expect disappointment. Someone conditioned by criticism may anticipate rejection before it even occurs. These expectations shape perception so powerfully that people begin recreating emotional familiarity without realizing it. To activate deeper human potential, we must first recognize how much of our behavior operates automatically. Awareness interrupts automation. The moment we observe our emotional patterns without immediately obeying them, a space opens between stimulus and response. In that space, consciousness regains influence over biology. Instead of reinforcing the same emotional chemistry, we begin teaching the body new possibilities. At first, this feels unnatural because the familiar identity resists change. But over time, repeated emotional coherence creates measurable transformation. I find it fascinating that some of the most advanced discoveries in neuroscience now echo principles that ancient cultures explored intuitively. Focused attention alters brain structure. Meditation changes neural connectivity. Breath influences autonomic regulation. Visualization activates many of the same neural regions as physical experience itself. The boundary between mind and body is far less separate than we once assumed. Consider the power of visualization alone. When people mentally rehearse movements or experiences with emotional intensity, the brain often responds as though the event is partially real. Neural pathways strengthen. Physiological responses shift. Athletes, performers, and high-level competitors have used this principle for decades. The body responds not only to external experiences, but also to internally generated emotional imagery. Now imagine combining focused intention with elevated emotion consistently over long periods of time. This is where transformation accelerates. The body stops living exclusively from past conditioning and begins adapting toward future possibility. We literally train ourselves into new states of being. And once enough repetition occurs, the new emotional state becomes more familiar than the old survival identity. People sometimes ask why certain individuals appear unusually calm during chaos. Often, it is because they have conditioned their nervous systems differently. Their biology no longer interprets uncertainty as immediate danger. This allows clearer thinking, deeper intuition, and more conscious decision-making under pressure. In many ways, resilience itself may be one of the most powerful hidden human abilities. Another overlooked aspect of DNA activation involves attention. Whatever consistently captures our attention shapes neural activity and emotional chemistry. If we constantly consume fear, outrage, negativity, and overstimulation, the nervous system adapts accordingly. But when we intentionally direct attention toward meaning, learning, growth, and emotional coherence, we reshape the internal environment influencing our biology. Attention is energy distribution. Where attention goes, biological resources follow. Modern life fragments attention constantly. Endless distraction weakens our ability to sustain deep awareness, and without sustained awareness, transformation remains shallow because the nervous system keeps returning to familiar emotional programming. This is why stillness becomes so important. Silence allows us to hear patterns we normally drown out with stimulation. Some of the most powerful changes occur not during moments of intensity, but during moments of observation. Sitting quietly, watching thoughts arise without attachment, becoming aware of emotional habits, recognizing how the body reacts before the conscious mind catches up. These moments gradually restore connection between awareness and physiology. And as this connection strengthens, many people report unexpected shifts in perception itself. Intuition becomes more reliable. Emotional sensitivity increases without becoming overwhelming. Creativity emerges more naturally. Decisions feel less forced. It is as though the brain stops operating only through analytical survival and begins integrating deeper layers of intelligence already present within the human system. What fascinates me most is that none of this requires becoming someone else. The process is actually about removing interference. Beneath the stress patterns, emotional conditioning, and learned limitations, there appears to be an extraordinary level of adaptive intelligence already built into human biology. And perhaps the true awakening begins when we finally understand that our greatest potential was never something we needed to acquire from the outside world, but something patiently waiting beneath the surface of our own consciousness, waiting for the precise moment when our thoughts, emotions, attention, and biology finally begin moving in the same direction long enough for the hidden systems within us to respond in ways that most people never realize are even possible. As those hidden systems begin responding, we also start recognizing how deeply interconnected the human body truly is. The brain does not operate in isolation. The heart does not function separately from emotion. The immune system is not disconnected from thought. Everything communicates continuously through electrical signals, chemical messengers, and energetic patterns that most people never consciously notice. What we call human potential may actually be the natural state of a system functioning in harmony. The problem is that modern life constantly pulls the body into fragmentation. We divide thought from feeling, logic from intuition, mind from body. We become mentally overstimulated while emotionally disconnected. Over time, this internal separation weakens our sense of clarity because different systems within us are sending conflicting signals simultaneously. I believe many people can feel this conflict without understanding its source. They sense exhaustion even after rest. They feel emotionally numb despite external success. Their minds race constantly, yet deep inside there is a feeling that something essential has been muted. In many cases, this is not weakness. It is the consequence of prolonged incoherence between the body, the mind, and emotional experience. Coherence changes everything. When the nervous system enters a coherent state, energy that was previously consumed by internal conflict becomes available for healing, awareness, creativity, and adaptation. This is one reason why moments of deep emotional alignment often feel powerful beyond explanation. A person suddenly experiences unusual clarity, solutions appear naturally, fear loosens its grip, the future feels open instead of threatening. These moments are important because they reveal what the body is capable of when survival is no longer dominating every internal process. For generations, human beings were conditioned to believe they are limited by circumstances alone. But emerging scientific understanding suggests that perception itself strongly influences biological response. Two individuals can experience the same event while producing completely different physiological outcomes depending on how the nervous system interprets the experience. Meaning affects biology. This is one reason why belief is so powerful. Belief is not merely an abstract idea floating inside the mind. A deeply accepted belief alters emotional states, behavioral patterns, stress responses, and even physical health outcomes. The body listens carefully to what consciousness repeatedly declares is true. If someone believes they are powerless, the nervous system often behaves accordingly. Energy contracts, motivation declines, creativity weakens. But when a person genuinely begins believing change is possible, the body frequently responds with measurable shifts in energy, attention, resilience, and emotional regulation. This does not mean positive thinking magically solves every difficulty. Real transformation requires consistency, awareness, and action. But belief changes the internal conditions under which the body operates. And those conditions matter far more than most people realize. I often think about how many human abilities remain underdeveloped simply because society rarely creates environments that nurture them. Children naturally display imagination, emotional sensitivity, intuitive perception, and intense curiosity. Yet as people age, survival conditioning gradually replaces wonder with stress and repetitive mental patterns. The nervous system becomes optimized for coping rather than exploration. But the remarkable thing about the human brain is its adaptability. Neuroplasticity shows us that the brain continues reorganizing itself throughout life. New experiences create new pathways, new emotional patterns influence perception. Repeated focus strengthens neural networks. In other words, we are not permanently locked into old versions of ourselves unless we continue reinforcing them unconsciously. This realization changes how we view personal growth entirely. Transformation is not about fighting ourselves, it is about retraining the body to operate from a different internal environment. The more coherent the environment becomes, the more stable our emotional state becomes. And the more stable our emotional state becomes, the less energy is wasted on internal resistance. Many people search for extraordinary experiences while overlooking the extraordinary intelligence already sustaining their existence every moment. The heart beats without conscious effort. Cells repair continuously. The brain processes enormous amounts of information instantly. Trillions of biological interactions occur every second with astonishing precision. Human life itself is already a profound expression of organized intelligence. DNA activation, in its deepest sense, may involve becoming consciously cooperative with that intelligence rather than constantly working against it through fear, chronic stress, and emotional chaos. Breathing patterns provide a simple example. Rapid, shallow breathing signals danger to the nervous system even when no immediate threat exists, but slow, intentional breathing communicates safety. Heart rhythms stabilize, stress chemistry decreases, mental clarity improves. A single conscious shift influences multiple systems simultaneously. Now imagine the cumulative effect of daily emotional regulation. Focused attention, meaningful purpose, restorative rest, elevated emotion, and coherent thought sustained over months or years. The body would inevitably become different because the signals shaping its internal environment would become different. This is why habits matter so deeply. Every repeated behavior becomes instruction. Every emotional reaction becomes rehearsal. Every thought pattern becomes conditioning. Most people underestimate how powerfully small daily states accumulate over time. The nervous system is always learning, and eventually the body becomes what it repeatedly practices. What excites me most is that human consciousness appears capable of influencing this process far more directly than previous generations understood. We are beginning to see evidence that focused awareness is not passive observation. Attention itself changes neural firing patterns. Intention influences emotional chemistry. Internal imagery affects physiological response. The observer is participating in the system being observed. That realization carries enormous implications. Because if consciousness can influence biology, then personal transformation is no longer just philosophical inspiration. It becomes an active biological process. And perhaps this is why individuals who undergo profound inner change often describe feeling as though they have awakened from a kind of unconscious sleep. The world appears sharper, time feels different, emotional reactions lose their automatic control. A deeper sense of connection emerges between thought, feeling, and physical experience. And the further we explore this relationship between awareness and biology, the more we begin to suspect that many so-called hidden human superpowers are not supernatural abilities at all, but natural expressions of a nervous system operating with far greater coherence, balance, and conscious integration than most people have ever been taught is possible. Which means the real frontier of human evolution may not depend entirely on external technology or genetic manipulation, but on whether human beings learn how to consciously participate in the untapped intelligence already alive within their own bodies and minds every single moment of their lives. The implications of that possibility are enormous because it suggests that the future of human evolution may be shaped as much by inner development as by external advancement. We have spent generations mastering the outer world through technology, engineering, and information, yet many people still struggle to regulate fear, focus attention, or maintain emotional balance. In many ways, the next leap forward may involve rediscovering how consciousness itself influences the quality of human life. One of the clearest signs that deeper biological potential is emerging is the growing awareness people develop toward their own internal states. At first, most reactions feel automatic. Stress appears uncontrollable. Emotional triggers seem unavoidable. But with practice, something fascinating begins to happen. We start noticing the reaction before it fully takes over. Awareness enters earlier into the process. That moment changes everything. Because the instant awareness appears, the old program is no longer completely unconscious. Most people do not realize how much energy is lost every day through emotional leakage. Constant worry drains attention. Resentment consumes mental resources. Fear narrows perception. The nervous system becomes overloaded with survival signals until exhaustion feels normal. Over time, this weakens not only emotional health, but physical vitality as well. Yet when emotional coherence increases, people often report the opposite experience. Energy returns naturally, motivation feels less forced, the mind becomes more organized, creativity expands. It is almost as though the body begins redirecting energy away from defense and toward higher functioning. I believe this is one reason states like inspiration and purpose feel so powerful. They reorganize the nervous system around possibility rather than protection. A person connected deeply to meaning can endure extraordinary challenges because purpose changes how the body interprets difficulty. The same obstacle that crushes one individual may strengthen another depending on the emotional framework surrounding the experience. This reveals something essential about human biology. Interpretation matters. The body is constantly responding not only to events themselves, but to the meaning assigned to those events. Two people can stand in the same environment while producing entirely different internal chemistry. One sees danger, another sees opportunity. One contracts emotionally. Another adapts creatively. Their biology follows their perception. That is why self-awareness becomes one of the most transformative abilities a human being can develop. Without awareness, we remain trapped inside inherited patterns, emotional conditioning, and automatic reactions learned long ago. But with awareness, we begin observing the architecture of our own behavior. We see how certain thoughts create tension. We recognize how emotional habits shape physical states. We notice how attention influences mood, energy, and perception. And once those patterns become visible, change becomes possible. The challenge is that modern culture rarely rewards deep inner observation. Distraction has become constant. Silence feels uncomfortable for many people because silence exposes unresolved emotional noise. But beneath that noise is valuable information about how the body is adapted over time. Some individuals carry years of suppressed stress without realizing how profoundly it influences their nervous system. The body remembers experiences long after the conscious mind stops thinking about them. Muscles tighten automatically, breathing patterns shift subtly. Hormonal responses become conditioned. Emotional reactions repeat with incredible consistency. The body becomes the subconscious mind made visible. This is why genuine transformation requires more than intellectual understanding alone. A person may consciously desire peace while their nervous system remains addicted to stress chemistry. They may want change mentally while emotionally rehearsing the past every day. Until the body learns a new emotional state through direct experience, old patterns tend to return. That is why practices involving breath, meditation, focused attention, visualization, movement, and emotional regulation can become so powerful over time. These methods are not escapism when used properly. They are tools for teaching the body a different internal reality. The nervous system learns through repetition and emotional intensity. If fear is repeated intensely enough, it becomes conditioning. But the same principle applies to empowerment, gratitude, resilience, and calm awareness. Whatever state we practice consistently becomes easier for the body to access automatically. This may explain why highly disciplined individuals often appear unusually centered during uncertainty. Their nervous systems have rehearsed coherence repeatedly. They trained attention instead of surrendering it entirely to external circumstances. And as a result, they retain access to clearer perception under pressure. Another fascinating aspect of human potential involves intuition. Most people think of intuition as mysterious, but it may partly reflect the brain's ability to process subtle patterns beneath conscious awareness. When mental noise decreases and emotional coherence increases, people often become more sensitive to information they previously ignored. Small details stand out, internal signals become clearer, decision-making improves without obvious analytical effort. In a constantly overstimulated world, subtle perception gets drowned out easily. But when attention stabilizes, another layer of awareness begins emerging. This does not mean becoming disconnected from reality. In fact, it often produces the opposite effect. People become more present, more observant, and more emotionally balanced. They react less impulsively because they are no longer operating entirely from unconscious survival programming. I sometimes wonder how different human society would become if emotional mastery were valued as highly as intellectual achievement. Imagine entire generations taught from childhood how thoughts affect biology, how emotional states influence health, how attention shapes neural development, and how self-awareness changes behavior. We might approach education, relationships, health, and leadership very differently. Because ultimately, DNA activation is not about becoming superhuman in the way popular culture imagines. It is about becoming fully human. It is about restoring access to capacities buried beneath chronic stress, emotional fragmentation, and conditioned limitation. The extraordinary abilities people seek may actually emerge naturally once internal coherence becomes stable enough for the deeper intelligence of the human system to express itself without constant interference from fear, distraction, and unconscious conditioning that has kept so many individuals disconnected from the immense biological and psychological potential, quietly waiting beneath the surface of their everyday awareness for far longer than they ever realized possible. And when people finally begin reconnecting with that deeper potential, one of the first things they often notice is a profound shift in how they experience reality itself. The external world may remain the same, yet internally everything feels different. Situations that once triggered anxiety no longer carry the same emotional weight. Problems that once seemed overwhelming become manageable. The mind stops reacting to every challenge as though survival is at stake. This change is subtle at first, but its long-term effects are extraordinary. Because once the body is no longer trapped in constant emergency mode, enormous amounts of energy become available for higher levels of functioning. Creativity expands, learning accelerates, emotional resilience strengthens. The brain processes information differently when fear is no longer dominating attention. I believe many people underestimate how much their perception has been shaped by stress chemistry for most of their lives. Chronic tension narrows awareness. It forces the nervous system to prioritize immediate survival over long-term growth. In that state, human beings become reactive rather than reflective. They operate from habit instead of conscious choice. But awareness interrupts that cycle. The moment we become conscious of our internal state, we begin separating ourselves from automatic programming. Instead of unconsciously becoming every emotion that arises, we start observing emotions as signals passing through the body. This creates psychological space. And within that space, transformation begins. The fascinating part is that the body adapts to whatever emotional environment becomes most familiar. If someone rehearses frustration daily, the nervous system becomes efficient at frustration. If someone repeatedly cultivates calm focus and emotional balance, the body gradually becomes more efficient at coherence instead. In many ways, the nervous system behaves like a living prediction machine. It constantly anticipates future experiences based on past emotional patterns. This is why deeply conditioned beliefs feel so real. The body has practiced them repeatedly until they become automatic expectations, shaping perception itself. And this is where many people unknowingly limit their own potential. If a person constantly expects failure, rejection, or disappointment, the nervous system prepares biologically for those outcomes before life even unfolds. Attention narrows toward confirming evidence. Opportunities become harder to recognize. Stress increases. Over time, the body reinforces the emotional state the mind repeatedly rehearses. But when consciousness changes, biology begins changing alongside it. This is not instant magic. It is gradual conditioning in a new direction. Every moment of emotional awareness weakens unconscious programming slightly. Every intentional response teaches the nervous system another possibility. And eventually, those small moments accumulate into a completely different internal identity. One of the most important realizations in this process is understanding that emotions are not enemies. Fear, sadness, anger, and uncertainty all carry information. Problems arise when those states become permanent environments rather than temporary experiences. The body was designed to move through emotional states, not remain trapped inside them indefinitely. Modern life often interrupts that natural movement. People suppress emotions while remaining physiologically stressed beneath the surface. The nervous system stays activated even when the conscious mind pretends everything is fine. Over years, this creates profound internal exhaustion because the body continues carrying unresolved emotional energy. That is why authentic emotional processing becomes essential for deeper transformation. Not emotional indulgence, but conscious observation without resistance. When emotions are acknowledged fully without becoming our identity, the nervous system can finally release patterns it has been holding for years. I find it remarkable that the body constantly seeks balance when given the opportunity. Healing mechanisms activate naturally during states of safety and coherence. Heart rhythms stabilize. Stress hormones regulate. Neural communication improves. The human system appears designed for adaptation far more than degeneration. Yet adaptation depends heavily on environment. And one of the most influential environments we experience is the emotional atmosphere created by our own thoughts and perceptions. This is why attention becomes one of the greatest forms of power. Whatever consistently occupies attention begins shaping neural circuitry. The brain physically reorganizes around repeated focus. Repeated fear strengthens fear-based pathways. Repeated gratitude strengthens different networks entirely. The nervous system becomes increasingly efficient at whatever state is practiced most often. Most people train stress daily without realizing it. They rehearse worry repeatedly. They consume endless stimulation. They rarely allow the body to experience sustained stillness or emotional recovery. Over time, the nervous system forgets what deep regulation even feels like. But the body remembers coherence surprisingly quickly once we begin practicing it consistently. Simple moments become powerful again. Conscious breathing, quiet reflection, focused attention without distraction, genuine appreciation, presence during ordinary experiences. These states may appear small, yet they communicate safety to the nervous system in ways that profoundly affect biology over time. And perhaps this is one of the hidden truths behind human superpowers. The extraordinary often emerges through mastery of the ordinary repeated consistently. The ability to regulate attention. The ability to remain emotionally centered under pressure. The ability to choose conscious responses instead of automatic reactions. These capacities may seem simple, but they radically alter how the brain and body function together. As coherence deepens, many people also begin experiencing a stronger sense of connection to life itself. Isolation decreases, meaning becomes clearer, intuition sharpens, relationships improve because emotional presence increases. The person stops living entirely inside mental noise and begins engaging reality more directly. This shift changes not only personal well-being, but perception of human potential overall. Because once we recognize how deeply consciousness influences biology, we can no longer view ourselves as passive victims of fixed programming alone. We begin understanding that human beings are dynamic systems capable of adaptation far beyond what previous generations believed possible. And the more we explore this relationship between thought, emotion, attention, and physiology, the more it becomes apparent that the dormant capacities hidden within human beings may have less to do with acquiring something new and far more to do with removing the internal interference that has prevented the natural intelligence of the body and mind from functioning at its highest level all along. Once that interference begins to dissolve, people often describe an unexpected sense of freedom emerging from within them. Not freedom from responsibility or challenge, but freedom from the constant internal resistance that once consumed so much energy. The mind becomes quieter. Emotional reactions become more measured. Decisions feel clearer because the nervous system is no longer overwhelmed by competing signals. This is where many individuals begin realizing that true transformation is less about adding something new and more about uncovering what has always existed beneath conditioned patterns. For most of human history, survival required intense vigilance. The brain evolved to detect danger quickly because survival depended on it. But the modern world places people under psychological stress continuously, even when no immediate physical threat exists. Emails, noise, financial pressure, social comparison, overstimulation, uncertainty, and constant information overload keep the nervous system activated far beyond its natural design. The body responds to imagined threats much like real ones. That fact alone changes how we should think about human health and potential. If the nervous system cannot clearly distinguish between physical danger and emotionally rehearsed fear, then chronic negative thinking becomes far more biologically influential than most people realize. The body keeps preparing for emergencies that never fully arrive. Over time, this creates exhaustion, not only mentally, but physiologically. The immune system weakens, sleep quality declines, hormonal balance becomes disrupted, emotional resilience decreases. Many people assume this state is normal simply because it has become common. But common does not mean natural. When individuals begin restoring emotional coherence, they frequently discover how unnatural chronic stress actually feels once the nervous system experiences genuine regulation again. Clarity returns, energy stabilizes, creativity reappears. The body begins functioning with greater efficiency because less energy is being wasted on unnecessary survival activation. I believe this is one reason practices centered around stillness have existed across so many cultures throughout history. Long before modern neuroscience, people recognized intuitively that silence changes human awareness. Stillness interrupts constant stimulation. It allows deeper patterns to become visible. Beneath the surface noise of the mind, another layer of intelligence begins revealing itself. At first, many people resist stillness because it exposes unresolved emotional activity they have spent years distracting themselves from. Thoughts become louder, restlessness appears, old emotions surface unexpectedly. But this is not failure. It is awareness finally catching up to patterns that were always operating beneath conscious attention. Healing often begins with observation. The moment we stop automatically escaping discomfort, we gain the ability to understand what the body has been carrying silently for years. Fear patterns become visible. Emotional habits reveal themselves. The nervous system starts communicating information that constant distraction previously concealed. And something remarkable happens when these patterns are observed without judgment. They begin losing control over us. This is because awareness changes the relationship between consciousness and conditioning. Instead of unconsciously identifying with every thought and emotion, we begin witnessing them as processes occurring within the system. That distinction creates psychological flexibility. It allows intentional change to occur where automatic repetition once dominated. Many people searching for hidden human abilities overlook this fundamental truth. The most powerful transformation often begins with mastery over attention itself. Attention determines perception. Perception influences emotional chemistry. Emotional chemistry shapes biological response. And biological response affects how we experience reality every single day. This interconnected cycle means that small shifts in awareness can eventually create enormous long-term effects. A person who learns to redirect attention away from chronic fear gradually changes neural activity. That altered neural activity influences hormonal balance. Hormonal balance affects emotional regulation. Emotional regulation improves decision-making. Better decisions reshape external life circumstances. Everything influences everything else. The body is not a collection of isolated systems functioning independently. It is an integrated network constantly adapting to internal and external information. Thoughts influence chemistry, emotions influence physiology, environment influences perception. And consciousness appears capable of interacting with all of it in ways science is only beginning to fully understand. One area that fascinates me deeply is the relationship between expectation and physical performance. Studies repeatedly demonstrate that belief alone can significantly influence outcomes. People often perform better when they genuinely believe improvement is possible. Confidence alters posture, breathing, focus, persistence, and emotional state simultaneously. The body reorganizes itself around expectation. Now imagine what becomes possible when expectation is combined with sustained emotional coherence and disciplined awareness over many years. Perhaps this is why some individuals appear capable of extraordinary resilience during extreme adversity. Their biology is not functioning entirely from fear-based conditioning. They have trained their nervous systems to remain coherent even under pressure. This preserves mental clarity while others become overwhelmed by emotional chaos. And maybe that is one of the greatest hidden superpowers of all, the ability to remain internally stable while external conditions fluctuate constantly. Because when emotional stability strengthens, perception changes dramatically. Problems become information rather than identity. Fear becomes manageable instead of paralyzing. The future stops feeling predetermined by the past. The body no longer reacts automatically to every memory, assumption, or imagined scenario. Instead, awareness begins leading biology consciously. This process also transforms relationships. People operating from chronic stress often communicate through defensiveness, projection, and emotional survival patterns. But as self-awareness increases, emotional reactivity decreases, listening improves, compassion deepens. Presence becomes stronger because less attention is trapped inside internal noise. In many ways, coherent individuals influence others simply through the stability of their nervous systems. Calm becomes contagious, just as fear does. Emotional states spread through tone, posture, expression, and unconscious social signaling constantly. A regulated person entering a chaotic environment often changes the emotional atmosphere without saying very much at all. That realization carries profound implications for human society. Because if individual consciousness affects collective emotional environments, then personal transformation is never entirely personal. Every regulated nervous system contributes differently to families, communities, workplaces, and relationships. Every emotionally coherent individual changes the quality of interaction around them. And perhaps this is why unlocking hidden human potential ultimately has less to do with domination, control, or extraordinary displays of power, and far more to do with restoring harmony between thought, emotion, biology, and awareness in a way that allows the deeper intelligence already embedded within human life to finally operate without the constant interference of fear, fragmentation, overstimulation, and unconscious conditioning that has shaped so much of human behavior for generations beyond what most people have ever consciously realized. Once people begin experiencing that inner harmony consistently, they often discover something surprising. The external world starts affecting them differently. Situations that once drained them emotionally no longer carry the same power. Conflict becomes easier to navigate. Uncertainty feels less threatening. The nervous system stops interpreting every challenge as a personal attack on survival. This shift creates a completely different relationship with reality. Most individuals spend years reacting to life unconsciously. Their mood depends entirely on circumstances. Their energy rises and falls based on external events. But when awareness deepens, a person gradually develops the ability to generate internal stability independent of temporary conditions. That does not mean becoming emotionally disconnected. It means no longer being controlled by every emotional wave that passes through the system. And this may be one of the clearest signs that deeper human capacities are awakening, because emotional self-regulation changes the entire biology of perception. A calm nervous system notices possibilities that a fearful nervous system cannot even see. Creativity expands when survival pressure decreases. Intuition becomes clearer when mental noise quiets. The brain shifts from reactive processing toward more integrated awareness. I often think about how much hidden potential may remain inaccessible simply because the average nervous system is overstimulated most of the time. Constant distraction fractures attention. Endless stimulation weakens deep focus. Chronic stress keeps the body trapped in short-term survival chemistry. Under those conditions, higher levels of awareness struggle to emerge consistently. But the human system is incredibly adaptive. The moment we begin changing the internal environment, the body starts responding. And at first, the changes may seem almost invisible. A person notices they are slightly more patient. Their thoughts become less chaotic. Sleep improves. Emotional triggers lose some intensity. Yet these small shifts represent major neurological and biological adjustments happening beneath the surface. Transformation often looks ordinary before it becomes extraordinary. One of the most powerful realizations people eventually encounter is that the body believes whatever emotional state is repeated most consistently. If stress dominates daily experience, the nervous system begins treating stress as normal. If emotional coherence becomes practiced regularly, the body gradually accepts coherence as the new baseline instead. This explains why repetition matters so deeply in personal growth. Occasional moments of inspiration are not enough to reshape deeply conditioned patterns. The nervous system changes through consistency. Every repeated emotional state becomes rehearsal. Every repeated thought strengthens specific neural pathways. Every repeated behavior reinforces identity. In many ways, identity itself is biological memory. People often define themselves according to patterns the body has practiced for years. I am anxious. I am impatient. I always fail. These statements feel permanent because the nervous system has rehearsed them repeatedly. But when awareness increases, we begin understanding that many identities are simply conditioned states maintained through repetition. And what is conditioned can be retrained. This realization is deeply empowering because it shifts transformation from fantasy into process. Change stops being about becoming someone completely different overnight. Instead, it becomes the gradual rewiring of emotional habits, perceptions, reactions, and biological responses through conscious repetition. The body learns through experience. This is why emotional experiences are often more transformative than intellectual information alone. A person can understand an idea logically for years without changing, but when the body directly experiences a new emotional state strongly enough, something deeper shifts. The nervous system begins recognizing another possibility for how reality can feel. I have seen individuals experience profound changes simply by learning how to feel safe within themselves again. Their posture changed, their breathing changed, their relationships changed, their creativity returned. Not because external circumstances suddenly became perfect, but because the body was no longer trapped in chronic internal defense. Safety is incredibly important for human potential. A threatened nervous system prioritizes survival. A regulated nervous system can explore, create, connect, and adapt. This principle affects learning, healing, emotional resilience, and even perception itself. When the body feels safe, higher cognitive and emotional capacities become more accessible naturally. And perhaps this is why environments matter so much. The people we surround ourselves with influence our emotional states constantly. Conversations influence thought patterns. Media influences nervous system activation. Daily routines shape biology through repetition. Human beings absorb emotional environments more deeply than they often realize. But awareness gives us choice. Once we understand how strongly attention and emotion influence biology, we become more intentional about what we repeatedly expose ourselves to. We recognize that every environment trains the nervous system in some direction. Some environments cultivate fear, distraction, and fragmentation. Others cultivate coherence, creativity, reflection, and growth. Over time, these differences accumulate profoundly. I find it fascinating that some of the most advanced discussions about consciousness are beginning to overlap with biological science in unexpected ways. Researchers studying neuroplasticity, stress physiology, emotional regulation, and psychophysiology increasingly confirm what many intuitive traditions suggested long ago. The inner world shapes the outer experience far more than people once believed. Not through fantasy or denial of reality, but through measurable biological pathways connecting thought, emotion, and physical response. And this changes how we understand human capability entirely. Because if consciousness influences physiology, then attention becomes more than passive observation, it becomes participation. The way we think, feel, interpret, and emotionally respond begins shaping the quality of our biological experience every moment of every day. That realization carries immense responsibility, but also immense possibility. It means we are not merely trapped inside inherited conditioning forever. We can observe patterns, we can retrain emotional responses, we can cultivate coherence intentionally. The nervous system remains adaptable throughout life when given consistent signals in a new direction. And perhaps this is the deeper meaning behind unlocking hidden human superpowers. It is not about escaping human limitations completely. It is about realizing how many of those limitations were reinforced unconsciously through stress, fear, distraction, emotional fragmentation, and conditioned belief systems that narrowed perception for so long that people forgot what a fully integrated human being might actually feel like when the mind, body, emotions, and awareness begin operating together in harmony rather than conflict, allowing the deeper intelligence within human consciousness to emerge more clearly than ever before in ways that quietly transform every aspect of how life itself is experienced from the inside out.
What makes the idea of DNA activation so fascinating is that it speaks to a deep intuition many people already feel inside themselves, the sense that human beings are capable of far more than they currently express. Most people move through life using only a fraction of their emotional awareness, mental focus, and inner resilience. They react automatically to stress, repeat emotional habits unconsciously, and rarely stop long enough to understand how powerfully the mind and body influence one another. But when we begin exploring the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and biology, we discover something extraordinary. The body is constantly listening to the mind. Modern science has shown that our genes are not simply fixed instructions operating independently from our experiences. Instead, our environment influences how genes behave. And one of the most important environments we experience is our internal emotional environment. The feelings we repeat every day, stress, fear, gratitude, hope, anger, peace, all influence the nervous system and the chemistry flowing through the body. Think of the body like a garden. Genes may provide the seeds, but emotions, thoughts, habits, sleep, relationships, and stress levels become the sunlight, water, and soil conditions, determining how those seeds grow. Two people may carry similar genetic tendencies, yet live completely different lives because of how their internal and external environments shape biological expression over time. This is why chronic stress affects the body so deeply. When the brain believes we are constantly in danger, it releases stress hormones designed for short-term survival. These chemicals are useful during real emergencies but harmful when activated continuously. Imagine revving a car engine all day without ever allowing it to cool down. Eventually, the system wears out. The same thing happens inside the human body. Prolonged stress drains energy, weakens immunity, disrupts sleep, and narrows perception. Most people today live in this survival state without realizing it. They wake up worried. They rush through the day overstimulated. Their attention is fragmented constantly by noise, information, and emotional pressure. Over time, the body memorizes stress so deeply that calmness begins to feel unfamiliar. And this is where the deeper idea of activation begins. DNA activation is not about suddenly developing supernatural abilities. It is about creating the internal conditions that allow more of our natural human potential to emerge. When the body moves out of chronic survival mode, energy becomes available for healing, creativity, intuition, emotional balance, and deeper awareness. A simple example is learning. Have you ever noticed how difficult it is to think clearly when overwhelmed by fear or anxiety? That happens because the brain shifts resources towards survival functions. But when the nervous system feels safe and regulated, the brain becomes more flexible, creative, and focused. The same person suddenly performs better, solves problems faster, and communicates more effectively, not because they became smarter overnight, but because the body stopped wasting energy on constant internal defense. This is why emotional regulation matters so much. Every emotion creates chemistry in the body. Fear creates one chemical pattern, gratitude creates another. Anger changes breathing and heart rhythms differently than compassion or calmness. Over time, repeated emotional states become biological habits. In many ways, the body becomes addicted to familiar emotions. A person who lives in stress for years may unconsciously recreate stressful situations because the nervous system has adapted to that chemistry. It feels familiar even when unpleasant. This explains why some people struggle to change even when they genuinely want a better life. The conscious mind desires peace, but the body still expects stress. Real transformation happens when the body learns a new emotional baseline through repetition. That is why small daily practices are far more powerful than occasional moments of inspiration. 5 minutes of conscious breathing every day can gradually retrain the nervous system. Moments of stillness throughout the day help interrupt automatic stress responses. Gratitude shifts attention away from survival and toward emotional balance. One practical exercise I often recommend is observing thoughts without immediately believing them. Most people identify completely with every thought passing through the mind, but thoughts are often conditioned reactions rather than objective truth. If someone repeatedly thinks I'm not capable, the body responds emotionally as though that belief is real. Stress increases, confidence decreases, behavior changes accordingly. But the moment we observe the thought, instead of automatically obeying it, awareness enters the process. We begin realizing that many limitations are reinforced habits rather than permanent truths. Breathing is another powerful tool. Slow, steady breathing sends signals of safety to the nervous system. Heart rhythms stabilize, stress chemistry decreases, clarity improves. This is why ancient practices centered around breath have survived for thousands of years. Modern science now confirms what intuitive traditions understood long ago. The breath directly influences the state of the nervous system. Attention also shapes biology more than most people realize. Whatever consistently holds our attention begins influencing neural pathways in the brain. If we constantly focus on fear, outrage, negativity, and comparison, the nervous system adapts accordingly. But when we focus intentionally on learning, meaning, creativity, and emotional coherence, the brain reorganizes in healthier ways. The brain changes according to what it repeatedly experiences. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it reveals something deeply hopeful. We are not permanently trapped inside old patterns. The brain remains adaptable throughout life. New emotional experiences create new pathways. Repeated calmness strengthens emotional regulation. Repeated focus improves concentration. Transformation becomes biological rehearsal. And perhaps the deeper lesson behind all of this is that human potential is not something outside us, waiting to be discovered someday. Much of it already exists within us, hidden beneath distraction, stress, emotional conditioning, and unconscious habits. The goal is not perfection, the goal is awareness. Because once awareness develops, we stop living entirely on automatic pilot. We begin recognizing how emotions affect the body. We notice how thoughts influence energy. We understand how attention shapes experience. And gradually, through small, consistent changes, the nervous system becomes more coherent, resilient, and aligned. That is when people often experience what feels like an awakening of deeper potential. Not because they became less human, but because they finally began functioning more fully as human beings.